So Owen, thank you very much for talking with me. And let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in 53 in Ludlow, Vermont. I sort of started out in Vermont and grew up in the Northeast.
And what month were you born in? I'm interested in your astrological sign.
June, I'm
June
a
what?
Gemini, my birthday's coming up soon.
I'm a June Gemini too. When's your birthday?
I don't like to give that out publicly.
Okay, I'll ask you later. I'm the
All
12th.
right.
And I don't know if you've heard of Jack Cameron, but he's active in the men's movement. He's June 11th.
Oh, I'm not that, I'll tell you that.
Okay. So Geminis are stereotypically many projects, like to communicate, a lot of fingers on the pot. Do you identify with any of that?
All the above, all the above. You might not know, but I grew up not knowing I had it, but what turned out to be Asperger's and dyslexia and dyspraxia and a few other things. So part of what got me into all this work with men was first working on myself and healing the majority of those problems. So yes, I have a lot of charts or a lot of planets in Gemini, and so I mean I'm very in that way mental, but in an unusual way.
Interesting. Um, from the little I know of Asperger's, people like Greta Thunberg say that it helps them really focus, but sometimes they don't pick up people's emotions or relate. So how does that work in terms of your work as a coach? What is the effect of having Asperger's? What does that mean really?
I think traditionally they've misread a lot of it. It was so many things, and they're starting to get it a little better. So, in the beginning, it was like people with Asperger's were unaware and disconnected. We can be disconnected was another thing, but unaware, it's actually sort of the opposite. We're so hyper aware that we get overloaded. So that's part of the hyper focus. So, for better or worse, I'm very aware, and I always have been aware of people's emotions. And so, through everything I've done in terms of my homework, my study with some, amazing people, and then tens of thousands of hours of working with people, men, I just learned to really read people really well in a way that's non-judgmental because in part because I was so dysfunctional. I have a lot of patience for others.
Hmm. In what ways are you dysfunctional? I haven't heard
I
any.
was. I mean, the traditional Asperger ways and dyslexic ways, and I was pretty checked out, and I was very tense. So I got into all this over 40 years ago because a roommate of mine in Boulder, Colorado, given up his law practice to move to Boulder to study to be a rolfer, and he argued his case so well, he convinced me to get rolf. That changed my life. Learned to be a rolfer. Spent 4 years studying rolfing and a lot of leading psychosomatic psychotherapies that were starting out in Boulder, Colorado, when I lived there in the latter part of the 70s. And so that really ended up being the foundation of my healing and all the work all the way into Everyman.
Why do you think it is that more boys, way more boys, are diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, Asperger's, learning disabilities, the whole gamut?
I think there's several reasons. I think a lot of those reasons are starting to come out. One, boys and guys are much more physically based. So just getting the average boy to sit still could be torture. I was ADHD and all that. That was the least of it. And I'm not trying, at the risk of sounding a little politically incorrect, I think, our institutions started out first being very regimentary. So when we went into the Industrial Revolution, we trained people to work in plants, but we also developed an educational system, as you know, very similar. And that just doesn't, I don't think it works for anyone. It certainly doesn't work for boys. And then the other thing that happened with that a lot of people don't pick up on is because guys were not at home because the fathers and their uncles and everyone else was at work because they had to be. They left the home, the family, the farm, the community, to do that. So women were left to raising boys. And the consequence of that is, and this is no conspiracy, boys in the culture picked up a more feminized model of emotionality. And now, most of us have been raised more by women. Our teachers have been women, and the therapists are women. And so we have this innately more sort of feminine perspective on emotionality. Not a bad one, and it's not like a conspiracy that women are trying to take over. It's just something that happened naturally, and not that guys were trying to leave the home; they just had to. And so, for me and for all these guys we work with, what we find is we put a group of guys together in a space, often a men's group or a course or even a coaching session, and they're authentic innately without any training. They start training themselves, because my belief and now my experience is that instinctually we know how to connect, we know how to be emotional as men, and when we put men together where we sort of take out the old model as the only way to do it, and women, at least for a while, and guys just to get to learn and screw up and teach each other through the consequence of just interacting in an authentic way, we teach each other how to be emotional as men, and inevitably, women love it. Because women are really good at going, no, you're not getting it. And they're not as good at telling us how to get it right, but they're also very good at telling us when we do get it right. And so when, the classic story is after a couple of weeks, or excuse me, a couple of months with guys in our groups or coaching or chorus, they start to pick this up mainly through interacting with other men, and they, go home, and the women are, they downregulate. They start to relax. They open up because they're relaxed, and the relationships often turn around because the guy is being a guy.
Yeah, and the heterosexuals like that.
Yeah, and the homosexuals like that too, because we get the whole spectrum, but obviously and honestly, most of our guys are heterosexuals.
You talked about feminized emotional approaches, masculine. What's the difference?
I think on the whole, there's not a lot. I mean, this is relatively speaking. I would say 10% may be different. I don't know. I mean, I don't know anyone who's measured it. But many years ago, from working with guys, I created what I call the MQ test. We have the IQ test, we have the EQ test, and I created the MQ test. And that came out of just working with guys and studying men and studying the research about men, that I saw that there were like 5 key trait skills that were more critical for men to succeed emotionally than for women. Now that's changing as women enter, the world that men have been sort of dominating for years. But still, I think this is still more critical for men. And one of them, the one that stands out the most for me, is the one I call assertive vulnerability. So I'm a huge fan of vulnerability. That's essentially what we're doing with guys, is we're allowing them to be vulnerable by creating safe spaces and letting them just work with it or stumble through it. So vulnerability is a key. It's a key in a lot of therapy now, particularly emotional focus therapy that's gotten real popular. And from the traditional perspective of vulnerability, which might be more a feminine perspective, we think vulnerability is a passive thing, and guys would interpret it as weak. Sometimes even women would, as a weak behavior. And yeah, it can be that, but what I'm saying with assertive vulnerability, what works for men and for women, is the ability to be open, which is to be vulnerable, and at the same time take a stance. And often that assertive vulnerability shows up most powerfully in relationships. And I have a little story that I tell, which is really what clicked that trait for me. Was many years ago, I was dating a woman, and she lived in Canada, and we were talking on the phone, and I'll call her Sue, and Sue just kept on ramping up her complaints about me and the relationship. And at first I'm going, okay, maybe. Then I go, I don't think so. No, I really don't think so. And my internal dialogue going, no, I can't take this. But if I say something, I'm going to end the relationship. And it just got to a point where I had to say something. So I said, look, Sue, this might be true for you, but it's not true for me. And I can't stand for this, or and it doesn't work for me for the relationship, and my partner relationship is not true. And then I shut up. And I was assured that, in that probably 1 minute, which felt like 10 minutes, that she was going to break up with me. But when she got back on the phone, her first words were, "Honey, you melted me." And what it was she felt me standing up, not just for myself, but standing up for the relationship. And that's that assertive vulnerability, being open and being vulnerable, but taking a stance. And that's what we want of men. But men don't know how to do it in a way that's not real hard or macho.
Can you just list the four other traits that you
Oh
think
no,
are
you're
good?
going to test me here. I haven't
No,
talked
I'm
about
just
this in
curious.
years. So, one is being an emotional entrepreneur. And by that I mean, I work a lot with entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are smart people and they take risks, but they take smart risks. And if something doesn't work, they get out of it or they change, they learn as they go. And for guys, when we are able to do that emotionally, when we're able to take risk and learn from the feedback of the interaction, we really improve. But it's the ability to take the risk and be willing to make mistakes. And so a lot of men, not only are they afraid to take the risk, but they're also afraid to make mistakes because they don't, unlike an entrepreneur, really believe that they can recover from a mistake. So that's one, and I'm just blanking on the other three, but
We can fill them in later. That
yeah, I can pull that up later.
right. Um, so you make the point that what is really formative in developing our attitudes towards ourselves is, of course, our growing up years. And so, what was your experience in terms of your father modeling, if that's the key to how we develop vulnerability, impeccability, whatever?
Yeah, I think it is a big key. Yeah, my father was, I guess you could say, closed emotionally. He didn't communicate. I mean, I knew sense that he loved me, but there was no real expression of affection. No, like I love you. He traveled a lot, so that added to the disconnection. And now, looking back, knowing what I know now, to call it insecure attachment, because he wasn't connecting with me. And my mother, not that she was, but she's just around more. So that was, in some ways, a duality, sort of a bit of a love-hate relationship.
Mm-hmm. Um, I'm going to talk to Jed Diamond tomorrow, and
Oh, great.
he thinks that men and women have, like, every cell is different because yours is XY and mine is XX, and that women's brain are more empathetic as a general trend, and men's more system oriented. So he really approaches it, I think, biologically, the understanding the sexes. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think there's science that supports that, research that supports it. My or every man's approach is, we support men. And what we found is when we create, again, a safe environment, give them some simple tools that they never got, and just general support, they learn what they need to learn that is biologically instinctive in them. Be it in their genes or be it in the epigenetics of them, but men can learn this really pretty quick when given the right environment. And one of the things that we've done with men, which I never really liked, and I didn't know how much I didn't like it until I started doing something else, was that we tell men how to be. And men, we want successful relationships. So if you give us a program, we'll try to make it work. But at the same time, men, we don't like to do things that we can't win at. So a lot of guys just give up, and now they're giving up more and more. They give up before they start these days, as we know, because they just sense that the program they were giving will not work for them. And some of it, I do think it's biological, and a lot of it is the culture.
So the program is men should be what?
Well, I think in a vague way, we're given two options: that we're hyper masculine, we're macho, and that's getting a worse and worse rap. And less and less guys want to do it, and those archetypes are dying off. And then the other one, which has almost gotten too much support, is this sort of hypomasculine, hypersensitive, and I really perfected that years ago. Uh, and that's safer, but ultimately for most guys, pretty unfulfilling for most women.
So
And so,
go ahead.
go ahead.
So I'm trying to understand, are you saying that the 5 traits that you mentioned are what will bloom when men are left with other supportive men? That's what will come forth. So that's what we're working towards.
Yeah, with other men, and men can get it on their own or get it in relationships. It's just the fast track is finding the right kind of, not men, but environment to do it in. And what happens is it's sort of like they take the best of both of those archetypical extremes, the sensitivity and their assertiveness, and they put it together as this assertive vulnerability that works for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates empathy. So when I work with companies, I work with first creating a safe environment in that space, and so I'm working with a lot of white men, and and everyone wants to change their white men for obvious reasons. But what they miss is you can try to force change on people, and this is what we've been doing to men for a while, and it works for a short term, but it backfires, and they resist directly or indirectly. So my thing is, make it safe for these white men, you know, to be vulnerable. I mean, to do the things for themselves that you want from them. Because it's, I can't, I think it's really hard, certainly in a genuine way, maybe any other way, to really create safe space and vulnerability and empathy when I don't feel it.
Because
And
you would
so,
feel judged, or you were being held to a standard that didn't fit your
yeah, and we have
internal.
to perform. So I think more and more people know, and the research talks about how men are in a performance box, a trap, and we're expected to, and we're reinforced and complimented on our ability to perform. And so we're good at that, more or less, and probably less in an emotional or relationship way, but we still try to perform. And so, particularly when we're performing at something we're not good at, I think it would be true of anyone, it's stressful. And so when it's stressful, it creates a survival response, which shuts down our ability to connect.
It's something like 70% of divorces in the U.S. are initiated by women. So something is going on that they're not happy. And I think usually the women say, he doesn't listen to me. He's on the couch. He doesn't do his fair share of family work. What do you think is going on that women are more likely to initiate divorce?
Oh, I think that's true on a symptomatic level. But to borrow something from attachment theory or the EFT work, is that most guys in that realm, particularly the emotional realm, are avoiders. They disconnect. And what I teach people, even therapists, is that the whole attachment theory, at least when it's applied, really comes down to the fight or flight or freeze, the survival response. So guys, some, but most either check out. I mean, they either leave literally or more metaphorically, or they freeze, which is another form of sort of leaving. And so obviously, the woman or their partner just gets more irritated. They become the pursuer, and so the guy just backs away further and further. So the woman, pursues the divorce. But what's interesting, and I was just saying this to someone else a few hours ago, is that um, often what happens, a guy joins one of our groups or trainings or platform or whatever, and often they're, come because they feel like they have a gun to their head. Either they do this or therapy, or they change, or they don't have a marriage or a relationship. And say 6 months into it, they're really into it. They're into it for themselves after a while. And they're enjoying it. And they're seeing all these secondary and tertiary gains. And then they're going home to their partner and saying, honey, I think you need to do this. Or us do therapy together and this and that. And she's going, what the hell happened to you? I mean, 6 months ago, I couldn't get you off the couch and, I had to threaten divorce for you to do anything. Now you're pushing me. And he goes, yeah, really want a relationship here.
That's great. Sue Johnson, do you know her? She's a Canadian
Yeah,
psychologist,
she's a
and she,
developer of emotional focus therapy. Yeah, we've communicated.
yeah, because that's what she says. The common pattern is the woman goes, connect with me, and he goes, ugh. And then, as you say, it's a vicious cycle. The more she pursues, the more he runs away. So the question is, if someone is in a pattern like that, what can they do so they're not in that vicious cycle?
Well, yeah, I work with couples, mainly with men, but sometimes with couples. My partner's an EFT therapist, and we teach the EFT workshop. So yeah, I'm familiar with that. And like EFT, I mean, at least my approach is to downregulate because as long as you're in a stress response, you're going to behave in a stressful way, and you're going to see everything as a threat. So the primary, not the only way, but the primary way I approach it is, all right, what do we need to do to downregulate both of you? Number one. And two, like what Sue would say, is that you got this cycle that you do, and that cycle takes over. And that's what I tell people. Your survival strategy, her or his survival strategy takes over, and then you have your relationship survival strategy that takes over. And it's like a computer virus or viruses that just take over. And then you might, after the fact, go, what the hell happened here? And it's like we disassociate and we go into our PTSD response and it takes over. So we might understand it, but it's not going to change until we can downregulate it. Now, what Sue and the EFT therapists are really good at is, using vulnerability and getting people to feel and express their vulnerable feeling and not the reactionary feeling. And if we're in a relationship and I express my vulnerable feeling, immediately you're going to downregulate because you go, you instinctually go from, oh, Owen's not a threat, Owen's being vulnerable, and the vulnerability, he can't be a threat.
So your book, Grow Up: A Man's Guide to Masculine Emotional Intelligence, what kind of strategies do you give men who maybe don't have access to a group, don't have support of other men? They have to kind of do it on their own.
Well, I would say that any man these days doesn't have to do it on his own. We literally have men from all over the world joining, in all different situations. And our membership's really cheap, but for some reason, guy couldn't afford it. We'd work with them, or just pay $5 or something, whatever. But short of that, the core of what I teach men is what we've been saying is to feel your body, because I was just coaching a client right before this, and he was really getting it real quickly that if he could feel his physical response, he was set up to feel his emotional response. So like most guys in the beginning, if you ask me what I felt, I just roll my eyes. What do you mean, what do I feel? Yeah, like you're speaking a different language. And so we get that, like in groups, particularly when I was doing the live groups, we get a new guy in, someone go, hey, Joe, what do you feel? And Joe goes, but every guy in the group knows he's feeling something, feels that he's feeling something, even though Joe doesn't feel it, and they see he's feeling something. So a more senior guy that's asking the question will go, okay, Joe, what do you feel with your leg? Oh, yeah, I'm tapping my foot. Oh, really? Oh, yeah, you notice that? Great, great. What do you feel with your hand? Oh, yeah, I guess my fist is clenched. All right. And so, we ask him about that. Oh, what do you feel with your jaw? So after a couple of minutes of getting him to feel his body, and then we go, what do you feel emotionally? And he goes, I'm angry. So getting guys to feel their body is sort of going in through the back door of awareness. And I haven't met a guy that couldn't feel something in their body. I met a lot of guys, including myself in the beginning, that at first couldn't feel their emotions.
Wow. And that's because they shut down because they were trained and expected to act kind of like women, and they couldn't do it, so they retreated. Is that a fair?
I think that's part of it. I think it's, as you know, you know, it's not that we've had stress and trauma. It's that out of either one, it could be a particular event, a traumatic event, but often it's what I call serial microtraumas or stressful events that cumulatively have the same effect as a major trauma. But either way, what happens is when we can't fight or flight, when we can't, defend ourselves, protect ourselves, or run away, our third instinctual option is to freeze. All mammals have this ability. So, as kids, when we didn't have agency, we couldn't do some form of fighting or running, we checked out, we froze. And then you got the cultural thing. And I think in some ways, the least of it is the feminine thing, but that adds to it. So you get all these compounding factors, the biggest, I think, being the trauma of childhood. And again, it doesn't have to be, severe trauma, but just, as you know, growing up in a family where there's no secure attachment, no real connection, is traumatic for a kid. And we're starting to realize that, and the research is showing that. So growing up with trauma, stress, whatever you want to call it, causes particularly men to disassociate. And so they disconnect. So they disconnect from their body, their emotions, the present moment. And, so we go into fixing, doing, thinking, analyzing, into our brain or into taking action. Now, women tend to do other things, not that they can't do those things, but guys typically do those things. And so then we get reinforced in a positive way out in the world for doing those things. For going, fighting the wars, being the grunt at the factory, figuring things out, being stoic. And we go down the list, and in many scenarios, those things work really well. And we want to succeed, so we do that. But at the end of the day, we're not fulfilled, we're unhappy, and we come home, and we're further conditioned to be disconnected, and we're tired and we're stressed, and then the person that we hope to and want to connect with is doing her thing because she's triggered to wanting us, the guy, and we're not there, it just starts to disintegrate. And guys are lost. They don't have anyone to connect to, anyone to explain it, or explain it to, or have someone explain it to them. And they feel trapped because they don't see a way out. And so we do what we call these global community calls, every week or two. And we get literally, a thought leader, and we bring guys in from all over the world. First time that they often experience those. And then we put them in these little breakout groups that Zoom does, and they come back. We asked a few guys, what was that like? Particularly in the beginning when we started and everyone was new, guys would say, wow, I thought I was the only one. Just to hear another guy have a similar problem and be honest about it, because it's just a few guys, every guy's blown away, because that's how disconnected we are from other men in any authentic way.
Have you had a chance to see the Showtime couples therapy reality show with actual couples?
I don't know if I saw that. I saw something a few years ago. I don't know if it was that one.
I'm bringing it up because it seems like the pattern is the women are angry, the men are withdrawn, the women blame the men, and then the men withdraw more.
Right.
And the women are often really angry.
They are very angry, and often, not all. I mean, I'm generalizing, but and they're angry for good reason, and men withdraw for good reason. And I agree. I mean, I'm not saying anger is good, but part of it is what Sue Johnson says is they're protesting, and there's other things happening too. And the guy is withdrawing because he doesn't want to argue and all that. And when he does, he loses. But again, she feels him withdraw. She's more scared. And so it's a vicious cycle. So what would happen when we do these, again, generalizing, these couples retreats, and so we do a little teaching, and we break off the couples into their separate relationship. And we try to do it someplace, and here in California, we often can, where they're outside. So they're all little private places. So we or I would go around and just sit in on the couple, and they're doing their little exercise. And inevitably, what happens is, that what you described, the woman's getting activated and the guy's checking out. And so I go, great, okay, let's just unpack this. And often the woman calls me over, typical thing, and the guy's trying, but he's doing like, he's just getting more withdrawn and resistant because it's a no lose situation for him. And so I start to unpack it. And one of the things I say is, I validate both of their experiences so they both start to relax. And I just review, look, you're both in survival response and relationship survival. So, yeah, this is a pattern. So we're going to, unpack it, downregulate it. And then, I'm talking to the woman. I go, I know how you feel, and I can relate to it because I was like this. But so can I help you, Joe? And Joe goes, yeah, help me. And so can I just sort of speak for you? Because, one, I'm a guy, two, I've been there, and three, I've been sort of tracking this couple, and I get a sense of what he's feeling, and I've done it long enough. So I just sort of like channel Joe. So I sit next to Joe, and, I'm facing Sally, and then for like 2 minutes, I just tell Sally what I or Joe's really feeling in a vulnerable way.
Like what might that be? Think of something.
I'm always not good thinking out of the
Should
whatever.
should I?
But if I thought about it or felt it, it would probably be something like, you know, when you say that, we'll make it real simple. You don't take, I didn't take out the garbage again and again and again. You keep saying that. That really hurts me because I'm simplifying this. I really want to connect to you. And so I'm thinking all day about coming home and how we might connect, and maybe tonight would be a different night, and I was going to do this. And the first thing I hear when I come in is, you didn't take the garbage out again. And then it just like deflates me. And then I try to say something, and then you complain, and that really hurts. And I really, and then I get into what I really want, and I tell her, Sally, how I really want to connect. And it's a lot better because it's, I'm using some of the details of their relationship. And she starts crying because she's hearing what she's always needed to hear. And sometimes he's crying because it's like he's hearing said what he's always felt. And then the next thing I say is, I want you to pick it up where I left it off. And he goes, and I go, I'm going to help you. And he can do it. I help him a little, and I guide him back. No, okay, try it this way. See, when you say it this way, what she does. And just look at her. When you get it right, she relaxes. When you start to go back to your old pattern, she tenses, right? Yeah. And so that gives them hope. And so what they see is a lot of it's just education. In this case, he never learned how to communicate that way. And then when he's under pressure, he's certainly not going to learn. Because he and I think every guy has performance anxiety. So we don't perform well in a vulnerable way when we're under stress. Not that we can't be vulnerable, but it's a lot harder, particularly for the first time. But like, these EFT therapists do is they sort of intervene in their own way, sort of like I do, and they unpack it, and they help each partner speak in a vulnerable way, and the other partner to hear it, and give feedback in a vulnerable way. And what happens after a while is it really creates new neural pathways, number one. Two, it gives them a new model. Three, they start to literally, this is probably the biggest thing, feel a connection. The connection or a form of connection that they had when they fell in love. And a friend of ours, Esther Perel, do you know Esther Perel?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, she's probably the most popular therapist out there. She speaks 9 languages. She's written several best-selling books. I think the last one was State of Affairs. And her claim to fame was at least starting out with talking about infidelity. but coming from a culture that's not the U.S. culture, she has a whole different perspective on it, uh, which really brings clarity and cleanliness to the whole issue. But she really understands couples. And one of the things that Astaire says, and she was interviewing me a couple of years ago, and she said this in the interview, and it really stuck with me, was that, you know, we fall in love, and actually she says in the books too, because we're really excited. But we want security. And then we get security and we get bored. And she says that's the biggest cause of infidelity is boredom. And so what I try to do is use vulnerability to rekindle excitement.
Yeah.
And I find that usually works. Because in the beginning of a relationship, you have vulnerability. Because, you know, if we're in a relationship and we just started out, I don't know if you're going to, you know, throw me off or out or whatever, or, you know, what's going to happen. That's scary. It's exciting. It's unpredictable. It's a turn on. It's all these things that keeps us engaged. But once we get the security we want, great. But then we get bored with it. And that's, you know, like she would say, that's human nature. So a lot of what we're dealing with, it's just human nature. You can call it biology, you can call it psychology, you can call it culture or sociology, but whatever it is, it's not a pathology.
And so she says the way to keep fidelity is to be interactive and really reveal what you're feeling.
One of the ways, yeah, and you know, and she would say, and I just said to this guy, you know, go and have fun. You look at kids; they're having fun, and if they're not having fun, they do something else. and a lot of it is because of our situation, and COVID only made it worse. But we don't have a lot of opportunities to have fun in relationships after, you know, it's a relationship, and you know, we're living together, and so. Just like kids, because we still have that part in us, we need to have fun.
Yeah, I did a book called 50-50 Marriage and 50-50 Parenting was another, and they said after kids, they really had to go outside the house, you know, even to a motel in town for a night to make things interesting.
Yeah, and more, particularly COVID, what I see, and I work with these guys, is that, you know, they live together, they have the same business together, they work together, and not that that's a recipe for failure, but it's a lot more strain on the relationship. And we need separation, and each person relationship needs it differently in a different amount. But every relationship needs some distance.
Right.
And particularly with COVID, a lot of people never got it.
Yeah. They drove each other crazy. How does this emotional impingement on boys relate to the fact that now girls are more likely to graduate from university, go to university and graduate around the world except sub-Saharan Africa? That seems to me a really big issue. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think it's what I've been reading is that in one way, guys, young men are giving up. And I think, you know, for sort of the reasons we're talking about, they've been told to be or behave in a certain way. It's just not natural for them. They don't even know that. And if they do, they don't, you know what is natural, how to be. And you get, you know, someone like Jordan Peterson saying what he says, which is controversial because he's in many ways speaking to the truth. And these young men are lost. And then part of it too, I think, is, you know, the whole educational system is being questioned, particularly also, you know, now with COVID. But, you know, I think some of these guys are going, you know, maybe I don't want to become a professional. You know, spend all my time sitting behind a desk in school. I mean, you know, I want to do something else. But I think a lot of it is, and I hear it from young women that are trying to date, you know, to find guys that can sort of match them. And women have become, in some ways, more masculine than some of the men. And that's confusing for both. And I say that with hesitation because I don't generally like to use the terms femininity or masculinity or whatever because one, they're charged, and two, they can be self-limiting. Where I think, we're both sexes are what's the word, limited by these models. Women, I'm old enough to remember, the women's lib movement starting and how women really rebelled, and the men's movement, the first sort of iteration of it was sort of on the coattails of the women's movement. Uh, and a different way, I think there's a new men's lib movement. I wouldn't call it men's lib, but men are revolting in different ways. And one of the ways is the way you describe, more unconscious than deliberate.
So they're saying I'm not going to be part of the system. I don't feel good in it, so I'm not going to work hard at do all that.
Right. And I'm not going to date. I'm not going to get married. And then, I'm going to, in
Play
a
video
class.
games.
Exactly. I'm going to just hang out with my video games.
That's pretty sad.
It is. It is. And, when we get a man like that, and every man, and it's like men are starving. And they don't even know they are because we've been collectively, generationally starving for so long that we don't know it. It's the water we've been swimming in. And it's just gotten worse and worse. The water's been sort of draining out of the pond. And when you give these men experience that they've never seen, let alone had, a lot of these guys, it's like it's the first time they ever had a real meal. I mean, this is really what it takes to eat good food and to be nourished. Wow. Now I have hope. And then, with every man, they have a way to sort of learn how to do that for themselves. And then, do it with other guys, which it's actually fun. It's like their new video game.
Ah, interesting. I want to come back to every man, but first, in terms of youth issues, boys issues, studies show that teens are increasingly depressed and anxious, especially girls. Is that because there's more permission for girls to say, I'm depressed and anxious? And there's like a third of American teens who are gender questioning. So I wanted to ask you what's going on with teens in terms of depression, anxiety, and this, am I bi, am
Yeah, I
I...
mean, it's certainly not my expertise. I mean, I might have a few thoughts. I think some of it's the gender thing, but I think it's a bigger issue. I think it's the collective stress, the collective toxins in our culture, literal, physical to, environmental to emotional, uh, you know, the whole questioning the whole model of what it is to be a human, let alone a man or a woman. I mean, so I think a lot of it's up. In a lot of our institutions are maybe not crumbling, but going through some kind of transformation. And, um, and their parents aren't really there. And it's not, again, I don't really see it this fault of parents. It's a society. I mean, these parents have to work so hard just to make it, and they're not around, and they're stressed out, and their parents weren't around. And so there's not a lot of real connection happening for these kids. So I think there's a lot of things happening, and we tend, as a society, to look at the top level, the symptomatic level, and go for the quick diagnosis and the quick fix, and treating it as a symptom rather than look at constitutional chronic systemic issue that's a lot more complicated and a lot harder and more expensive, more work, and takes longer to solve. So I think in some ways this generation is like the canaries in the mine. They're really showing how dysfunctional the society's gotten, and in many ways toxic.
Yeah, I think an example of that superficial approach is some scholars say, well, they're anxious because of social media and their social media use. And I think that's really they're anxious because there's so much pressure and it's so much harder to get into college. And then you graduate with $25,000 debt. And
25, 50, 100,000. Yeah. Yeah. So I agree. And it's like with guys, oh, because of video games. Yeah, there might be a part of it, but it's much more than that and much more complicated than that. And then you get the teen suicide, and you got all these things that are just snowballing. And so society's approach is give it a diagnosis and give it a drug.
yeah, give the boy Ritalin and give the girl an antidepressant. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the girl get slowed down and depressed, and the boys getting hyperactive. So let's get everyone even here.
Wow. Let's talk about the men's movement. The early part was, I think, of people like Herb Goldberg, The Hazards of Being Male, The Wisdom of the Penis, Pay Attention to Your Body. And then it branched into mythopoetic and men's rights after divorce and wherever. So where does Everyman fit in, and how did you get involved with forming it?
Uh, it sort of was a natural evolution of what I needed. I mean, I did all this study work on myself for decades, and then about 25 years ago, I turned the corner on a lot of my challenges, but I just wasn't having the kind of relationships I wanted with women. And I've always been a guy that sort of thought out of the box. And I go, maybe I should work with men, not like teach them anything, but be like in a men's group. I go, oh, I don't want to do that. I go, oh, that's probably a sign that maybe I should do it. So I called up an old friend of mine because I knew he knew something about men's group. He gave me a lead. I pursued it, and that was 1995. And, did a training, did a group, and yeah, neither was real impressive, but it was enough where I go, I think there's something here. Uh, and then I moved actually at the time to Northern California for 13 months, helped start the first real group in Northern or Sonoma and Napa County. It was a really good group. That inspired me. I did a few groups when I moved to Idaho. And then 17 years ago, I said, all right, I'm going to redesign the model. I'm going to design a model that I want based on everything I've learned, I've used clinically, that I just, one, found works, but it's fun and different. And then I'm going to ask a group of guys, and if they join, great. If they not, I won't do it. I asked 11 guys, they all said yes. I went, oh no, I guess I got to show up. And for 17 years, they've been my beta testers. So we've had over 300 men through the group. We got 3 ongoing groups in a town of 8,000.
This was in Idaho?
Idaho, Sandpoint, Idaho. And I'm still a member, but now I just do it Zoom. And 40 guys currently, so over 300 guys have gone through, and it's changed lives, saved men's lives. They did a documentary on us several years ago, and there's a guy in the film, saying that if it wasn't for the group, I wouldn't be alive. So those stories are pretty impressive, but for most guys, it saved marriages, relationships, changed careers, and it really created a community for these men. And then I started getting requests to help other guys start groups. Then a little over 4 years ago, we started Everyman based on all this, and I particularly keep refining the pedagogy of what it is for Everyman and how can we help men. And it's just in one way gotten simpler and simpler. And like I was saying earlier, it's really based on the physiology of our body. I call it the physiology of emotions. And guys relate to it. I mean, it's science that backs it up, but but most guys go, that's simple. I understand it. I can apply it. I don't need all these theories and all these ways of being, all these shoulds and shouldn'ts. It's just connecting to my experience, and from my experience, connecting to other people. Really pretty simple.
It makes sense that this follows from your Rolf training. There's a kind of coherence to your development. That's really interesting. You said we started Everyman. Who else?
There was there was originally four of us. Now there's two of us. The other fellow's Lucas, which I think you're connected to, and he's he runs the organization. He's our CEO, and I'm the guy that I'm sort of the mad scientist that comes up with all the trainings, the courses, and teaching guys. But now, yeah, we have a whole cadre of guys that have been with us for ever since we started, and some guys, when from my men's group, uh, that are really highly experienced. They're out training other men, and men are again, not it's not for every guy, but the guys that usually end up with us find that they're getting a lot more from it than they expected. Because the thing that I realized years ago in my clinic was that most men will not do something until they're in so much pain that the pain's greater than the fear.
Mm.
And so the biggest fear that brings men to this work, or every man, is the fear of relationships. Yeah, either losing it, never getting one, or and there's other things. And so we'll just say within 6 months they're on the other side of their presenting problem, and then it's like, I got the relationship I wanted and more, but they stay in the group because they like the brotherhood. But also, we work with guys on supporting them and creating the life that they want, and that life keeps evolving. So we got guys in my group in Sandpoint have been in it since the beginning and have changed professions, saved marriages, the kids have gone off and had great lives because they sort of reoriented themselves years ago.
Mm. So, roughly, how many men have been through EVERYMAN after these 4 years?
That's a good question. Because until COVID, essentially we were a live company, live trainings and live groups, and we lost track of some of the groups. We'll say we had 100 groups around the world, maybe more, but we'll say 100 groups around the world that started using our protocol. I forgot how many trainings we've done in those years, but maybe 50 trainings in some form or another. And, a lot of guys, sometimes up to 60 guys in the training, usually less. Some would repeat. Some did a few of our trainings. And now we have, I think, over 800 guys in our membership. And that's just been word of mouth. We haven't done any marketing on that, any, direct marketing. And then we got guys that come to calls and they're sort of peripherally involved and read our newsletter and all this. So we've been spending most of our resources and energy in the last year on pivoting EVERYMAN to a virtual company and finding ways to apply everything that we knew and I learned over the years to the virtual world. Honestly, I knew there was something there because I've been pushing for it, but I did not think that virtual groups, virtual trainings could be as powerful as they've proven to be. And guys are changing their lives, connecting up in ways. A major TV network's doing a story on us because guys are finding themselves through EVERYMAN. Guys in like Chicago will find someone in San Diego and connect and go out and fly out and see each other. And they, and because they connect so deeply virtually, they end up eventually connecting physically. And none of these guys would have expected that. We did a course that we finished, I think less than a month ago, and there was a man, he's probably in his 50s. He owned a successful business in New York City, and within a couple of weeks, he's telling me, I'm telling guys I love them, and I haven't told people in my family that. I can't believe this. And every week, it just got to be more and more for this fella. I mean, he was the poster child, but that's how it is for a lot of guys. It's like, again, we're hungry for connection. We just need the right environment, and most guys will just start eating it up.
If you had ancestry or lineage, would you put it in the Robert Bly inner warrior work in the woods kind of? No?
No, I'm familiar with that. I've read that stuff. I've had training in some of that stuff. I put my lineage and every man's lineage into somatic psychotherapy. So when my first teachers was Peter Levine was my son. My first teacher was Ron Kurtz. You know him?
Mm-mm.
Ron Kurtz started a Comey therapy. And Comey therapy was the sort of sine qua non of psychosomatic therapy. And Ron came out of the lineage of bioenergetics, which came out of Lowen, which came out of Ryan. And so it was all about the body and its psychology, was how the body manifests or expresses emotions. But Ron brought in mindfulness, which is completely new to that model, and he was a master, a master. And I remember I was in his first professional training. So one of us would stand up, he'd ask that person a few questions. Sometimes within a minute or two, that person's sobbing on the floor because he just knew, reading their body and experience, what to ask that would have that person connect to what they were disconnected from. And I was blown away by that. I mean, I thought he was like this shaman wizard, and I didn't understand it, and I pursued that anyway, and I slowly integrated it or understood it. And then my other main teacher was Peter Levine, the guy that really
The
literally
trauma
sort of
guy.
wrote the book on trauma. And he was originally a Rolfer, and Dr. Rolf said, Peter, I love you, but you're just a Rolfer. And so he got a couple of PhDs from Berkeley, and that got him with his Rolfing training into studying the emotional physiology and trauma. And I remember, I think it was 1980, he first explained it, and I just knew that it was true, and that became a core of everything I've done ever since. And then it goes on from there. But those were the first two. So it's grounded in the the emotional physiology.
Got it.
And so it's not that I'm against the archetypes and all that, because I've studied it and even taught that stuff. But my experience is that tends to be top down. There's value in it. And my approach has always been, and these people's approaches, is bottom up. Start with the body, start with the experience, start with the emotions, and then see where it goes, and then bring in your mind. Rather than have your mind be the determiner, let experience be the determiner. And guys seem to relate to that. And so when I work with a guy like in a deep way, I don't start out with their mind, I start out with their experience. And at the end, I help reframe that, taking all the pieces that were disconnected and giving them a possible new way to hold all the dissonant pieces in a way that it all works.
Wow, that's powerful. Is there a profile, like your typical participant is a middle-aged, white, heterosexual guy, or do you see any pattern in who's attracted to Everyman?
We tend to get guys from the late 20s to early 70s. I think the last, because we're always testing, I think the last number I saw was 44 is the mean age. When we started out several years ago, it was from 34 or whatever. So it skewed a little older. We tend to get guys, again, sort of in crisis, and I, over the years, seen two inflection points. I see guys, we'll say around 30. So the guy gets out of school for his 20s, and I'm generalizing, he's about having a venture. But one day he wakes up and he wants to settle down, have a real job, a real profession, a real family, a real relationship, but he doesn't know how to do it. And until then, his biggest source of education has been his peers, but all his peers don't know how to do it. So we get guys at that point, and then we get sort of guys at the other end of that cycle where they've created their professional success, and then they come home one night and no one's there. Sometimes literally, but usually more metaphorically. And they want to sort of catch up, connect, It's like, I miss my, literally and metaphorically, I missed them because I was gone. And so they have remorse, they don't know how to do that. So that's stressful for them, and we work with them. And in working with them, they get to support the younger men, which is healing for the older men. So it just naturally just starts to work. Now we get guys all in between, different races, different sexual orientations, We have a drop-in group for black men. We have a drop-in group for gay men. But yeah, generally it's heterosexual men. But we get the whole spectrum, and we literally have had men in our groups on our calls from all over the world. Now, most of them are from North America.
I'm really struggling to find young men who are interested in the men's movement and these kind of gender liberation, as Warren Farrell calls it, issues. What do you think, that they're just not in a place of being in a crisis, so they don't want to spend
No,
time on it?
I think the older generation is looking in the wrong place with the wrong perspective. So we're looking for these younger men to be interested in the men's movement, but we're applying our history and our prejudice onto these young men, and they're not interested in a men's movement. They're not interested in that. They might be interested in, I'm just spacing it out. What happened a few years ago with the women's movement? That my dyslexia is coming in, but yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't think
Not
of it. Anyway.
CR groups.
No, it'll come to me when I'm not thinking about it.
Okay.
But they're interested in, equality, diversity, but not through the lens or the vehicle of the men's movement. They're interested in these things, but in a different way. And they're not interested in being told what to do. And that's a lot of what the men's movement was. And men at that time needed to be told what to do because that's what they thought they needed. And so it worked. But I think younger men, for whatever reason, they don't want to be told what to do. It's like, yeah, maybe give me a context of a frame, give me some tools, and let me figure it out with my cohort here. And that's one reason that EVERYMAN just exploded, was that these young men were hungry for it. They were bright, they a lot of them were very successful, were really happy in the way of being connected. And they weren't attracted to all these other men stuff out there. In my sense, and from what I hear from them, is that it was old. It wasn't them. And they didn't want to be told. But you get these young men in one of our groups or rooms, I mean, they really open up. I mean, and they're really perceptive and in the right situation, authentic. And they're doing everything that the men's movement would want them to do without ever thinking about it or calling it a men's movement.
It seems like a lot of the juice or the passion in the men's movement is father's rights, especially after divorce, and there's really a focus on the main problem young people have, especially boys, is father absence, lack of father involvement. So there's a lot of focus on fathers. So what do you think has to change so that men can be more involved fathers, and men, even if they're divorced, can be active in their kids' lives?
Well, again, we can tell people what to do, and that doesn't usually work as well as having them want to do it.
Yeah.
And then giving them the tools to do it, that's even better. So what happens with these guys is that they have an experience of connection. So it's hard for a man to want to be a husband, let alone a father, when he's never had any real connection or know how to create it. And so, guys tend not to want to do something if they can't win at it or they don't believe that they can succeed at it. So you got real connection in these groups. You give them, a sense of contributing to other men through that connection. Older men sort of mentoring them, not like you should do this and this and this, but just, being there with them. And they go, I think I can do this. I want to do this. And I got support. I got my community. I got my group. I'm not alone in doing this. And, most guys, the only source of emotional connection or emotional authority or emotional support is their wife, their partner, which even in the best relationship is a burden. And so it's a joke. I mean, some women were a little hesitant. I think it's changing and getting less and less so over the years to have men join one of our groups or trainings. But the joke is that, yeah, that woman that was hesitant 3 months into it, she's saying, "Hey, Joe, it's getting close. I mean, you better get ready. I don't want, you don't want to be late to your group," because these women see the benefit. Like our groups in Sandpoint are 4 hours long. At least they were when they were alive, which is a huge commitment for guys. Now that's longer than all the other groups that we do at EVERYMAN. But that just shows you that guys, once they get into it, it's not a big commitment. Time flies like that. They look forward to it every week. Their families look forward to that guy going every week because they get direct and indirect benefits. And we don't. Go ahead.
In those sessions, does everyone check in? It's like you get 5 minutes, I get 5 minutes, or is it like whoever has the most drama going on gets the focus, or how is it organized?
Well, everyone checks in at a couple levels, and then if one guy wants to work, he gets a chance to work. And every group's different, every meeting's different, but we have a simple structure that guys need safety and a basic structure. Women, yeah, they need safety, but they don't need the structure. So in one way, it's arbitrary or maybe even artificial. But once a guy agrees to our agreements, which are pretty straightforward, like confidentiality and this and that, all the things you would expect. So we say, these are the rules, this is the structure, and then guys relax. And the guys show up. And a few times we brought women in different capacities, and they're blown away with how vulnerable these men are, how authentic they are. But that's because it's safe, but because there's a agreed upon structure. Men need structure.
Well, I think women do too, but
to relate.
So the structure is everybody checks in, whoever needs the work says, I want to work today, or how would you describe the structure?
So what we do is we have like a business round. We just talk about the logistical things that we might need to talk about. We do a somatic meditation that gets guys to slow down in their body, which is say 5 minutes. It just resets everyone, and we get a big return on those 5 minutes. The meetings are more efficient, if you want to look at it that way. And then we do the first round. The first round is everyone goes around. Say we're sitting in a circle. We just go around in a circle. One guy starts, and from there we go around. And every guy just speaks about what does he feel in his body and what does he feel in his emotions. 2 simple sentences. Just gets every guy in the room, gets things moving. Next round, every guy goes a little longer. And then you get to talk about what's happening with him, what's happened in the last week. First round is just what's happening in that moment. Second round, what's happening in their life. And then out of that, we sort of determine who gets to do the third round, which is the work round, where guys get to do work. Maybe 1 or 2 guys get to, do some work or get supported in what they need. And then the fourth round is like the first round, a quick checkout round that completes the meeting. The guys will often agree to do a stretch. It's like taking the work of the week and putting it into the action into their life. And that's the meeting.
I was in a feminist men's group, National Organization for Men Against Sexism, and they ran beautiful, beautiful meetings because they were structured like that. They had an agenda with time, check-ins at the beginning, evaluation at the end. If you wanted to extend the time, you could vote to do it, and it really worked beautifully. Yeah,
we create the external structure so that we can allow for chaos in the center of the meeting. So we don't know what's going to happen, and we've seen it all. I've seen it all, but these guys are able to bring all that because it's safe and we have a structure, and they know that whatever happens in the meeting stays in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised, living in a small town, I figured that, something would leak out. Rarely in the 17 years of the group and me being there did anything ever leave our groups.
Do
So
you also use acupressure tapping, emotional freedom technique that works with meridians in your work?
I have. I'm not taught it, but we don't do it in the group. But I'm all for it.
Yeah, it really works. So are you thinking, are you seeing young men come into Everyman? Is there like a wave, or what are you seeing in terms of these men who are coming up?
I think they're hungry, they're open, and most of them just dive in. Again, it's not for every guy, but the guy that is willing to take a risk, um, they usually really get into it. And they can start slow. They can, just do a drop-in group, which is an hour group. Uh, right now we have some free ones, and then, or become a member and take different theme drop-in groups. And then they can take some inexpensive online courses that are real effective, that go, either for a weekend or for several weeks, one for a few hours once a week. And then, they can join an ongoing weekly group, which is sort of the core of our work. Groups have always been the core of our work, and that's where guys that want to really do the work they end up in a regular group.
You mentioned a documentary about the group. What is there a way that people can see that?
Yeah, it's called About Men. It was done by a woman out of New York City. Uh, yeah, I haven't seen it in a while, but I'm sure it's someplace on the internet.
Okay.
Uh, have you seen the movie The Work?
I've been trying to see it, but I think it's available on YouTube. But I tried to see it, and then it gave me another movie altogether. But I know it's about the work in prisons in
Right,
Folsom.
right, right. And it's a powerful movie, and it's similar to what we do. And we've worked with Elder Jackson, which is sort of one of the main guys in it. And he got out because of it, and because of his work in prison. And brilliant guy, and he has a great YouTube, not well YouTube, but TEDx talk that he's done.
Mm-hmm. And what about your background? You're not trained as a therapist. You have a master's in public health, or what's your academic
Yeah, I'm not
access?
trained as a therapist, but I did a lot of postgraduate training in therapy, and I trained therapists and psychiatrists. Um, but yeah, I don't want to be a therapist. I'm not a therapist. I work with therapists. Like I said, my partner's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Um, I love therapists, and we get more and more of them joining us, the men, particularly the emotional focus therapists, and sending a lot of their men to us because particularly a couple therapists, to use my words, guys are often behind the emotional learning curve. Again, it's not their fault. It's just what we got stuck with. And so these therapists see that, uh, yeah, joining every man really speeds that up for them.
Any other thoughts about how we can help men be the full human beings? Anything that we haven't talked about?
Um, I would say have compassion and patience for men because even when it looks like we're not trying to do it, we are or we want to. And as Sarah Perel says, often women get critical of men because we're not doing it in the way that that women expect. Um, so how we communicate or communicate vulnerability is not, again, how women do it. So even by our own standards, we might not do it right, but give a guy a little patience, reinforce the positive. Yeah, tell him that he's not doing something right or it just doesn't work, but realize that in spite of how macho or how angry or withdrawn he might be, he's still sensitive. And even guys that look like they've given up usually haven't given up. I mean, if they see hope and they get some simple tools, they'll show up and um, do their best to make the relationship work.
Do you think there's any cultures that do a better job than we do of um, raising boys and letting men be real human beings? I mean, I always think of the Nordic countries do everything thoughtfully, but I don't know. Are there other cultures that you've run
Well,
across?
I think in general, the more primitive the culture, the better job they're doing.
Because they have initiation ceremonies and age groups
That, and
and
then it's more tribal. I mean, it's less stressful and more connection, and it's the whole community raises the kid. I mean, it's all the things we know, which is you know for all these years, that's how humankind has been until the last few hundred years. It's been more communal rather than industrial, or now tech oriented or virtual. So, uh, yeah, I think there's Western countries or cultures that probably do a better job than others. But in the general, we tend to be disconnected in the West. And the more nature based cultures or civilizations tend to be more connected, not only to nature, but to each other.
when I was in Cuba, a woman said to me, "You have so many material things, but we have family, friends, we dance, we have connections in a way." She didn't use that word, but I think that kind of fits in with what you're saying.
It does. And then, I know sound like I keep saying the same thing, but that's what guys feel when they get into these groups. It becomes their little tribe, and not in a religious or self-righteous way, but just their community, a micro community.
A support
And
system.
yeah, I mean, our ancestors used to go out on hunting parties. Guys, are used to that, just going off on their own and being together for a period of time. We need that. And I think women need to, be together too. But women generally have done that better than men have. Because we know, and the statistics show that the older the guy gets, the more lonely he is and the less friends he has. And the biggest suicide swath are guys like in their 50s because they're so alone,
Mm,
particularly in rural communities.
mm, mm.
And it's a downward spiral.
I'm thinking of fraternities that college fraternities are kind of like that tribal age group support system, a, a throwback to the past. I wonder if you think they serve as this kind of group for men that's helpful.
I think they do. And I think we've seen that there's a certain dysfunctional part to it too.
Like the
And I think
hazing.
the military serves a lot of that for men. And the paramilitary, like the fire department, particularly when they stay together, the police department. And so outside of that, outside of school in the military, most guys have no connection. Maybe, like a sports team,
Mm.
uh, but you track guys as they get older, they have less and less and less connection,
My
particularly real ones.
right. My theory, we have a stereotype that men love to watch football and women like to shop. And I thought, well, maybe that's because football is like catching the prey. It's like hunting and you're fighting for the ball. And women shop, it's like gathering, hunters and gatherers did. Do
Well,
you,
I think there's something to be said for that. And and yeah, I think when we can see it from that perspective, we can have more appreciation for each sex and what they want. And we might not understand or even like it. And it doesn't mean that we should allow everything, but the essence of these things are representative of the natural need that people have. And you gotta provide for that natural need, just like it's a need for hunger and water or food and water. You got to provide for that, and if you don't, it's going to show up in some dysfunctional way or
la-
unhealthy way.
Last question is, I'm also working on a book about happy long-term marriages, and a problem over time is how to keep things interesting, how to keep sex interesting, to keep passion alive. And I think what you suggested is to do different things, have variety, have fun. But would you add to that how to keep romance alive over time?
What would I add to that? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, I would add the biggest thing is vulnerability.
Mm.
Vulnerability. And we sometimes need help for it. I mean, I'm often sending my guys and their partners to emotional focused therapists so that they have someone that can guide them and teach them. Because again, I don't see it as therapy as much as education. You know, it's like giving someone a tennis racket and saying go out and play tennis. You wouldn't expect that person to immediately be able to play tennis. You'd have to train the person. But we expect people to succeed in relationships, and the only training we've had is modeling dysfunction.
Sue Johnson said that a lot of times sexual dysfunction is a presenting issue, but if they work through their bonding attachment cycles, change the downward spirals, then the sexual interest pops back up.
I think that's true, but also, and Sue would disagree with this, but this is sort of Aster's position. The opposite is true. Good sex fosters connection. Good connection fosters good sex. And I think both are true. And yeah, one might be more true for a certain person or a couple than the other. But it can go, and I've seen it go both ways.
But the question is, how do you keep good sex over time if you're monogamous with the same person for 50 years?
Yeah, and and I think each person has to have a source of renewal in their own life and a source of renewal within their relationship. And excitement, or and it can be not the usual word excitement, but something that is not flat and consistent. I mean, so there's a lot of little things. You don't have to have it all, but you start getting some of them, including physical health, and you're now on the other side of this phenomena, and and then it snowballs in a positive way.
So
So I have
excitement.
a call I need to lead, so
Okay.
I need to get
Um,
off.